It's pretty wild to think that one of the best explanations for what's going on with your paycheck was actually written more than 200 years ago. It sounds nuts, but the economic forces that Adam Smith laid out way back in the 18th century, they are absolutely still shaping our world today. So let's jump right in and see what he can teach us about our wages. So Smith kicks things off with this super simple idea. He wants us to picture this original state of the world, way before private land or big piles of money existed. In that world, the entire product of your labor belongs to you, the worker. You make it, you get it. Simple as that. And here it is, that perfect scenario, visually. The whole pie, 100% of the value you create, goes straight into your pocket. There's no landlord taking a cut, no boss to share the profits with. It is all yours. But of course, as Smith knew all too well, that simple setup, well, it wasn't built to last. Right, so that perfect world couldn't stick around. As soon as land became private property, the whole game changed. Two new figures step onto the scene. You got the landlord, who wants a piece of the action just for letting you use their land, and then you have the master, as Smith calls them, who's the person with the money to buy the materials and tools to get the work done in the first place. And just like that, our original pie, it gets carved up. The landlord demands their share, and that's the first slice gone, that's rent. Then the master who put up the cash and took the risk, they demand their share. That's the second slice gone, profit. Whatever is left over, well, that's what becomes the worker's wages. And this, right here, sets the stage for a constant battle over the size of that wage slice. The interests of the workers and the masters are, let's be honest, completely at odds. Workers are always going to want to get as much as they can, and masters are always going to want to give as little as they can. It's a permanent tug of war. And in this tug of war, you've got to see that the deck is seriously stacked in favor of the masters. For starters, there are way fewer of them, so it's a lot easier for them to get on the same page. The laws at the time actually forbade workers from organizing, but not the masters. And here's the real kicker. A master can usually afford to wait things out for a year, maybe even two. Most workers, they couldn't last a month without a paycheck. So what's their secret weapon? What gives the masters the ultimate edge? Smith says they're basically in a constant, unspoken agreement to keep wages low. They don't need secret handshakes or meetings in smoky back rooms. It's just the natural thing for them to do to protect their bottom line. And that gives them a huge, built-in advantage in any fight over pay. So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? If the whole system seems rigged against the worker, are they just doomed to scraping by? How in the world could their wages ever actually go up? And Smith's answer is, well, it's probably not what you'd expect. It's totally counterintuitive. He argues that the single biggest thing that determines your paycheck isn't the direct struggle with your boss. It's the overall health and, most importantly, the direction of the entire national economy. Okay, so he breaks it down into three basic states an economy can be in. First, you've got a progressive state, where the country's wealth is always growing. Second, a stationary state, where a country might be rich, but it's stopped growing. And third, a declining state, where it's actually getting poorer. Let's take a look at how each one actually plays out for the worker. Yeah, to really hammer this point home, Smith doesn't just stick with theory. He takes us on a kind of world tour, using real-world examples from his day to show us exactly how these three economic states affect the lives and paychecks of everyday people. All right, first stop on our tour, the progressive state. For Smith, the absolute best example of this was 18th century North America. Now, it wasn't the richest place on Earth, not by a long shot, but it was the most dynamic, the most thriving, and it was growing at an incredible pace. And Smith backs this up with cold, hard numbers. He points out that in New York, a ship carpenter was making 6 shillings and 6 pence a day. That's a whole lot more than a carpenter was making back in London, which was supposed to be the richest city on Earth. So what gives? It was simple. The demand for workers in America was constantly, relentlessly growing. And this booming economy wasn't just about money. It changed everything about society. The population was doubling every couple of decades, not from people moving there, but from families having kids. Labor was so valuable that having a big family wasn't a burden. It was a source of wealth. He even says a young widow with several children was seen as a fortune for any man to marry because of the value of their future labor. Okay, so that's what a growing economy looks like. But what happens when all that progress grinds to a halt? For his next case study, the stationary state, Smith turns his gaze to China. Here was a country that had been incredibly wealthy and advanced for centuries, but in his eyes, it had hit a long, long plateau. And the result for the average person? It's a night and day difference. Just read this quote and think back to what we just heard about America. In a stationary economy, even if the country as a whole is rich, just raising a family becomes a desperate struggle for a worker. So here's how it works. When the economy flatlines, there are no new jobs being created. But the population keeps growing, so the number of available workers is growing. This creates this intense competition where workers are basically forced to underbid each other for jobs, driving wages down to the absolute bare minimum needed to survive. And that brings us to the third and by far the bleakest scenario, the declining state. This is where the actual funds available to pay for labor are actively shrinking. For Smith, the tragic example of this was Bengal, under the control of the East India Company. In a declining state, everything just falls apart. It's this absolutely horrific downward spiral. As the demand for workers vanishes, everyone starts competing for even the most menial jobs. This extreme competition pushes wages below what a person needs to even live. And the result is inevitable: want, famine, and death on a massive scale. And to put a fine point on it, a really brutal point, Smith notes that in a fertile country like Bengal, more than 300,000 people were dying of hunger in a single year. It was proof positive that the country's economic engine wasn't just stalled, it was going backwards, fast. Okay, so after seeing those three very different pictures, what's the big takeaway? What is Smith really trying to tell us about what makes a country truly wealthy and its people prosperous? It all boils down to this. Your paycheck is basically a thermometer for the entire economy. High wages are the clearest sign of a healthy, growing nation. Low wages are a symptom that things have stalled. And outright starvation, well, that tells you things are going backwards fast. It's not about how much treasure a nation has in the bank, it's about which direction it's headed. And at the end of the day, Smith brings it all back to a powerful moral argument. An economy isn't just numbers on a page. It's about people. And he says it plainly. There's no way a society can truly be called successful or happy if the vast majority of its people, the workers who feed, clothe, and build everything for everyone else, are themselves poor and miserable. And that leaves us with a huge, lingering question, one that's maybe even more urgent today than it was back in 1776. For Adam Smith, continuous growth was the engine that lifted everyone up. So it forces us to ask ourselves, in a modern world that's facing all sorts of new limits, what happens to the workers' share of the pie when that growth finally slows down or stops altogether?